came here, you're certified because they want that, right? I'm certified for this, TFCBT, I'm certified for 0 to 5, I'm certified for, how can we certify you guys for ACEs? Everybody, you do ACEs all the time, you do CRIs all the time. Maybe we need to look at that, right? Either I certify you or we bring somebody from somewhere else. Because it's really, really important, right? There's so much more to that. I remember when I was in graduate school, it's like, oh, I learned how to do the Rorschach. Man, that's a lot. That's a lot.
I hate that thing.
And I don't do that anymore, because that's a lot. Okay? But I did it because I had to. So really good. Really glad to see you guys again. I was trying to guess, like, how tall are they? Because all the students are big. And it's like, I was wrong. Okay. I was like, some of you guys are taller, and some of you guys are not. So that's fine. Okay. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Silva. Where's that slide? Beth. Oh, you have it.
Which slide?
The one that says who you are. There. Okay. Right. So he has a lot of, he went to Mount St. Mary's. So he was an MFT, and then he's also a PsyD, like me. And I met him when I was an MFT, and I supposedly trained him in hypnosis.
Supposedly.
Supposedly. But I clicked it so I wouldn't remember, right? So, so he has expertise in forensic psychology, especially clergy, sexual offenders. My expertise is more on the victims, but he knows about the perpetrators and the victims, and so much back there, right, about that. Okay, private practice in San Fernando Valley before he left us and went to Maryland for training there, and also the Vatican.
I did a presentation at the Vatican.
Okay, he was there once.
Once counts. It counts, I'll say.
You taught there for like a year or 2 years.
No. They didn't want to know that
And he's
much.
a very funny guy. I'm usually actually not that funny either, but he brings it out in me. So he's a really irreverent guy. And so now he's a professor for Oblates of Mary Immaculate in San Antonio, Texas. And that's where I was there for a year, and he helped them survive that, which I appreciate. So he's under the auspices of, he's a psychologist, right? And a licensed MFT, but he's also Father Brian because he's a Catholic priest. So much for our Latino population thinks if you go into psychology, you're going to become an atheist. If you get therapy, they're going to make you an atheist, right? If you go to therapy, they're going to make you have sex. There's all these misconceptions out there about what mental health is or isn't or can or cannot be, right? So very important to educate them about, well, that's what you've heard very confidently, but that's not the truth. There's a lot of variation out there. So that's really appreciate his level of expertise in various areas. And so when I asked him, could you come out and present, it's like we discussed different things, and there's something that as supervisors we were noticing changes in terms of these generational issues, which you all don't know because you experience your generation. This is how it is, isn't it? No, it's not. It's a classic, what our parents said or what other people who were growing up said, kids today, right? Yeah. Generations do things differently. In our generation, there was no such thing as computers, other than that big old thing
in a separate room.
In a separate room with these cards, and then if you drop the cards on your own stuff. Right? Now you have a computer in your hand, right? It's more powerful than that big old computer was. All this stuff, but so all these things, and then who knows what's going to happen on the next generation, right? These kids coming up with these computers in their hands, and maybe not knowing what it's like to get your hands dirty with dirt, play on grass, things like that. Right? So without further ado, here's Dr. Silva to give our presentation.
You don't have to clap until I do something that's clappable. Yeah, as Dr. C mentioned, he and I have known each other for a very long time, and both of us would fit into a generation I'll talk about in just a moment where some of the things that we see today socially would have been norms that today we see socially are, oh my God, that can't be. Like Becky, no, right? So one of the things I want to kind of aim at today is you thinking about where the parents of the students you work with might be, the grandparents, because some may have been traumatized. They might not be living with the parents. They might be living with an older family member. And where that alpha generation, the new generation, would kind of sit. So today as we go through, I'd like you to kind of keep in mind your view today might be different if you are the age of some of us in the room, whom I shall not name. Jose. All right, so here's kind of the plan I had. Now, as he mentioned, I'm used to dealing with graduate students. I teach at a seminary. I teach them counseling skills, and some of them have the innate ability to listen, actively listen. Some of them are more passive people, and they don't have that ability. Some of them, I think only once or twice have I pulled a student aside in my class in pastoral counseling and said, look, after you get ordained, don't do this. You don't have it. You don't have to have it. The oils don't bring it. Don't do it. Because they were just so clueless as to how to listen and respond. So what I want to do a little bit today is talk in general about some new ideas. We'll talk about screen time and non-screen time. We'll talk a little bit about work ethic and the difference in where millennials, Gen X's, iGens might be about what that is, what work means, what leisure means. Because I think it's going to be really different for someone of my age. I'm 68. Just so you know, Dr. C is not as old as me. I just want to make sure that there's no confusion about, yeah, keep it clear. Keep it clear. And then we'll talk a little bit more about screen time and maybe some psychological creepiness toward the end. Okay? If you have questions along the way, raise your hand right at the moment. I don't mind being interrupted. And know that I'm going to send the bibliography of where I got all this information to Ben. So you'll have it in a PDF to Ben. He used to be over there. And I'm going to send a PDF of the PowerPoint slides to Ben, so you'll have them. So don't worry about having to frantically take pictures on your phone of a slide, okay? If you want to, you can. But on the other hand, you'll have those if you simply remind Ben to send them to you all. Okay? As soon as the day finishes, I'll go home, turn them into a PDF, and send them. So here we are. Generational differences really have a lot to do with social psych and also sociology and anthropology when you think about it, because the operative questions for us are quite different. Now let me just try, I tried this with my grad students, seminarians the other day. For some of us in the room, the operative question about like a change in your life or a peak experience socially in your life. For some of us in the room, that question would be, where were you when JFK got shot? That was a pivotal moment in our society at the time. That's the operative question. Where were you when Kennedy got shot in Dallas? Most of you in the room, you weren't even born at that point. So what's the operative question for you that would have been the social switch, that after that point, something happened? Okay? Yes?
Maybe where were you when the shutdown happened for COVID?
When the shutdown happened for COVID. And that would be for some of the young people you work with, because they will not have experienced the other one that somebody's going to come up with in just a sec. 9/11, right. So those of you who are a little bit older than 13 or 14, right? Are there others other than 9/11? 9/11? Okay, yes?
The space shuttle accident?
Space shuttle accident, Columbia.
Yeah.
That's an operative question. Where were you when Columbia blew up? You can see that these are kind of social things that happen where, on the other side of that, things are just different. It's not like the storm we had, the snow goes away, a year from now we'll talk about it like history. It's a moment that is so pivotal. And so what you see here there are historical, oops, I got the wrong thing, just a sec, there we go. Historical and social shifts, societal shifts that take place. I was talking to someone who was particularly into music, and they didn't identify 9/11. They said, "Where were you when Kurt Cobain died?" And I was like, okay, that's a social shift. I'm not sure that it's one that everybody participated in. When John Lennon was shot, that's one that's a little bit further. Yeah. Pardon me?
Michael Jackson was a big
Michael Jackson, when Michael Jackson died. So what are these pivotal moments in social change that you would want to go, I see. If you say to your kids, wow, you know, like when JFK got shot, they're like, was that the guy in the history books? Who was he, right? Is that the Marilyn Monroe thing? What's the... They're not going to know. But if you talk about major things that have happened like 9/11 or like the pandemic, oh, now they can identify. Major social shift. I was able to see my friends on the playground, and the next day I was locked in the house with my mother saying, "Are you on the computer? Are you on the computer?" Right? Then there's also cultural things like incremental movements, lifespan impact. So what has impacted our lifespan? The pandemic might be one thing where we saw young people, old people, middle-aged people dying of a virus that we still haven't figured out where it originally came from. There's a lot of, you know, it came from here, it came from there, I don't agree, I agree, all these things. But those shifts tend to be moments in which generations change because of the experience, right? The example I would use for the pandemic would be, now we're having the evening news telling us about how students have lost educational grades and talent, skills, because of a 2-year hiatus from in-person learning. Right? You also have attitudinal changes, persuasion through media, especially social media, public campaigns, etc. Okay? The latest of which is, what is it, Hershey's, I think. Hershey's has an ad for Women's Month, or International Women's, I think it's International Women's Month or something. And people are complaining about it because one of the women they have featured in their ads is a transgendered woman. And people are like, right? So there are these societal shifts and changes that are persuasive. Social media we're going to talk about when we talk about screen time, but we all know how toxic social media can be. And I'll give you some examples because luckily for me, I have an eclectic kind of private life, and I watch Twitch. Anybody know what Twitch is?
Yeah.
Everybody knows what Twitch is, okay. So I watch video games, and I've gotten to know some of the gamers online, and I play a couple of the games, but anyway, that being aside. So I've gotten to know how they kind of frame their world. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about screen time. And then personality changes, the interplay of social personality, who I am socially, and major life changes and relationship pressures. It used to be when we were growing up that we played outside in the yard. I remember going to my grandmother's on the weekends, and you know, Grandma would say, "Okay, go play," and I'd go out into her driveway, which was partially dirt, and dig a hole and build a city and bring little cars. And now that would be considered free-range childhood. Right? Free-range childhood is not a good expression in today's culture, right? You don't let your kid walk to school because they might get run over by a truck. Somebody might kidnap them. My God, what kind of parent are you? Normative in my time to walk to school, not normative now. So it's these shifts that begin to influence us. And then one of the important shifts is the idea that everyone should be recognized, right? So everybody gets a certificate of being best student of the day during the year at some point. Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets, you know, you did your best, that's great. So how do we then see that later those kids grow up and they're able to manage stressors, they're able to manage difficulties, they're able to manage college, graduate school, where they're like, well, you didn't measure up. Try again, see you later. Well, wait a minute, I should get a trophy. Where's my certificate? Yeah. Those shifts will be things that influence the generations. And I think very often we don't really include that in the decision process. Generational labels may not have clear points of start and end. That's the article that I gave you, and for that reason I gave you, I think it's Campbell. Yeah. For that reason, because Campbell starts off the article saying, to those of you who haven't read it, I'll say a little bit about it, because it really is an interesting article, to me at least. Campbell's talking about this. Can we really say that boomers are boomers? Can we say that the silent gen is the silent gen? Or are the beginning of those generations different than the end of those generations? Because they're based on the years you were born. So can we really say that they're a unified construct, if you want to put it in a scientific word? And Campbell's conclusion is, no, you can't. But on the other hand, we're going to talk about it as if we can, because there really is a cohesion because of these social factors. It's not a full-on, 100% absolute, but the beginning of a gen will be a little bit different than the end of a gen when we get to talking about those. Okay? So here are the generations. Look, we got an L. That doesn't mean loser, okay? The L alone doesn't mean lose. Isn't that interesting? I'm betrayed by a PowerPoint. So this is, when you think about generations, this is kind of what we're dealing with, okay? I don't think there's anyone in the room who would say they're the greatest gen. The greatest gen would have been, what would this be? This would be about World War I, maybe? Yeah. Silent gens, these folks would be basically our grandparents for most of you. Parents, maybe for me, would have been born in that time frame. Or this is us, this is myself. Not Rosie, of course. But Jose probably. Gen X, 65 to 79. Now, wouldn't this be, those of you who might be in the room who were born in that time frame, wouldn't this be the place where we begin to see that shift from some people are rewarded by trophies and certificates to everyone gets awarded trophies and certificates? The beginning of that would be right in this time frame. Now, what do you think these people are doing, say, with iGen? They're most likely the parents of the iGen people, right? Because they've grown up, now they've started to have their kids, and now their expectation is, right? This is the way it should be because this is the way I experienced it as a kid. So that now iGens and then alphas are being raised by this generation who got rewarded for everything, for anything, okay? The millennials, we all know about the millennials. They don't want to work, they want to be leisure time, they want to get paid for not working. We all know.
I'm a millennial and I'm a hard worker.
That's the rumor, isn't it? The rumor is the millennials are problem kids.
I think they're mistaken.
The reputation here is that the millennials are the problem children. The reality is the millennials are actually relatively balanced, right? They're just the ones who began to say, wait a minute, do I want work, for example, just as an example, do I want work to be the primary thing that I do as my self-identity, right? We would see that up here, especially in the boomers. In the boomers, when we stop working, then we have to question, well, who am I now? Because I'm retired. What does that mean? I don't have to go to an office every day. What does that mean for who I am? Here is where we begin to see people saying, I have a job so I make money so I can pay my bills, and you want me to work overtime? Sure, you're going to pay me time and a half. And if not, let's not do that. This is where we begin. You know, I think you were right about one thing, Jose. I'm pretty funny. This is where we begin to see those attitude shifts, those social shifts, where businesses now, as a matter of fact, one of the articles, I didn't print it out for myself, but I think it's in the stuff that I'm going to give to Ben, is an article from a general in the Army talking about how they need to shift in order to train millennials and iGens as they enter the military. It's a very interesting article where he says they need more affirmation, they need more interpersonal assurance, because that's just where they're coming from, right? Previous generations, the sergeant would have berated you and you would have, gotten mad and changed because you wanted to, show him. And now with this generation, we begin to see the, maybe this Army thing isn't for me. Catch you later, right? So it's a different social expectation for them. The iGens, this is where I got interested, I got interested in the iGens. And the first book that I read that I thought was, yeah, I'll tell you the story. I saw an interview with this guy, Lou Knopf, and Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan is a journalist, you've probably seen him like on TV or whatever. The other guy is, I think he's a social psychologist, unless I'm wrong. Anyway, they wrote this book called The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And they document, I think it's like 6 different areas where things have changed drastically. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. But it's an interesting book if you have time away from the husband and the kids. It's an interesting book to think about because it's going to make you mad. Because you're going to read this thing and go, well, wait a minute, I'm not like that. But what he's documenting are these cases that you see in the news. One of them being, I'm going to talk about it, but a philosophy professor who wrote a paper about transgender and the kind of philosophical, thing, and compared it to, gosh, now I can't remember, but it's in here, so I'll get to it. The uproar about that was like this superficial kind of, how can you, blah, 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 you're a sexist, you're a this, you're a that, and he's going, it's a philosophy paper, right? I am not telling you how to live your life, I'm talking about the difficulty we have in thinking about and, but there's this superficial kind of thing, right? We see it all the time. Most recently, probably those of you who watch CNN, you saw it in the Don Lemon controversy, right? They were talking about someone running for president, and he made a comment that was an off kind of comment. Well, all of a sudden now, he's identified as a sexist, You're a sexist. Well, because you made one comment? What about the rest of your life? Let's look. No, because of that one comment, he's a sexist. That kind of thing is, how do we say, well, that's great, show me some evidence that that's the case longitudinally and let's talk about it. Nope, just that one comment. So this book is really interesting from that documenting, and if you want to take a look at it, you can pass it around. But then from that, I found this with this woman, Jean Twenge. Twenge is a social scientist who did a bunch of research on the millennials and wrote a book called The Generation Me. And then she wrote a book on the iGens called iGen, which are also called Gen Zs, but I haven't encountered that in literature, in psychological literature. Most everybody says iGen. So these are the pivotal things that got me thinking about the differences between the generations. I brought them so that people could look at them and say, oh, this looks interesting, or let me get that, or let me not get that, pass it on. So whatever's helpful to you. I guarantee you, oh, that's what I was going to tell you. The Coddling the American Mind book I gave to, there's this professor at another university across town who's, she's like a phenomenal woman. She's a history professor who's Hungarian, speaks about 4 languages before she ever started. And then she decided, I want to write about Japanese culture, went and lived in Japan, learned Japanese, wrote her thesis on Japanese culture and history, and then came back and taught at this university. So I gave it to her and said, you know, this might be an interesting thing because she's always talking about interesting history. I said, well, why don't you take a look at this? So I gave it to her, I got her a copy, gave it to her. And then she said, well, do you have time to meet, you know, like next week? And I said, sure. So she shows up with her little 3x5 card in her hand and says, well, what do you think of the title? Do you think that's true? And she's got a list on both sides in a week of questions about how she disagrees with this book and stuff she agrees with. I don't know, it's an interesting read, it gets you thinking. So there we are. So when we talk about the generations, this is largely what we're talking about. And this will be in the slides, of course, so you can refer back. But if you're not sure, then you raise your hand and tell me, well, can you go back to that chart? And we'll go back here so you can identify. These would be what? These are the young kids you'd be dealing with in elementary school, basically, the 10-year-olds, more or less. iGen, the end of iGen was 2012, so those are going to be your, what would it be, 11, 12, those are your probably junior high kids, and maybe even high school. Okay. So let's talk about bad ideas. This is the Lukianoff book, The Coddling. The fragility of the no nuts rule. He documents that he has his young child in an elementary school, and he goes to the first parent meeting, and they start talking about words you can use and words you can't use, and parent participation, etc. And one of the things they say is, you can't give your children peanuts or peanut products because of peanut allergies. And he says, oh, okay. So if there's no one in the class who has a peanut allergy, then is it okay to send peanuts? And they say, you cannot send peanuts. And he says, well, yeah, but if there aren't any kids who are allergic to peanuts, and they say, that's not the question. You cannot send peanuts. So we're not even an inch deep, right? We're kind of on this superficial, we just identified that there's a peanut allergy in the world, and you shouldn't have peanuts. Can't you get that? What's wrong with you? Well, I'm asking a deeper question than the peanut rule, right? So there's this, was kinder. And this non-exposure translates somehow to a non-developmental look at the world, right? If you screwed up and put something on Twitter or Facebook, or in the good old days, MySpace, if you screwed up and put something on there that was bad when you were 12 years old, now that you're 40, well, of course, that's who you are. What? Right? I mean, the way to think of it is everybody's still wearing diapers and wetting the bed. Of course you are. Because nothing changes. It's all this superficial thing. Okay? So his thing is, it translates to a tolerance of a non-developmental look at things. Maybe one of our tasks as therapists is to help young people see that there is a developmental progression, right? Therapeutically, okay, you messed up, okay, you got in trouble in school, okay, there's problems. But you know and I know that things change, right? You didn't know how to ride a bike, now you know how to ride a bike. You didn't know how to drive, now you have a driver's license. There is a developmental progression to things. The difficulty is society would say to us that that's kind of tenuous because you are who you were. Okay. Also, emotional reasoning. This was a great quote that I found because I think it's very psychological, but it wasn't. It was from the 1st or 2nd century. What really frightens and dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them, the way in which we frame them from a psychological standpoint. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. How much do we make things significant that probably are not truly significant? Right? So with this bad idea, we've now kind of gotten to the point where something that's insignificant has been, and we'll talk about it in future slides, has been blown up to be significant. And then there's the us versus them, the good people versus the bad people. I can tell you that I just stopped counting the number of times that my millennial graduate students, these 20-somethings in my class, would say, well, you can't say that. Like, why? Well, right? The thing that I'm famous for on campus, actually, that the other faculty just kind of laugh and turn away, is several times students have said to me, but the bishops wrote this, or the Pope wrote this. And I say, well, that's fine. There's one data point. Where are your other data points? The Pope wrote it. Yeah, that's one data point. Let's keep moving. What else do you have? They don't think in those terms. They think in terms that this is authority, I say yes, everything works fine, I submarine, keep on moving. Which, for graduate students, is not unusual. Sometimes you have to get past that professor, because that's the only professor that teaches the Rorschach, right? To this day, I'm suffering through the trauma of learning and scoring multiple Rorschachs. They are not fun, and they are not easy. Luckily now we have one system. I think before my time, there were, what were there, 5 systems or 7? Yeah, a lot for scoring. And everybody was like, our system's better, our system's better. Like, okay, let's get numbers. I'm a numbers guy. So there's us versus them. We see everybody around us and say, oh my God, I am mortified. I'm offended. Well, what does that mean in society today? To me, as a boomer, I'm sorry you're offended. Let's talk about this. What is it about that offends you? To the current world, I'm offended means everybody ought to be offended, because my opinion is normative. Everybody thinks this way because I think this way. So we have a big shift socially in what it means to look at what's good or bad. It's difficult to say, right? I mean, can you just imagine what a 20-something or even a teenager would think to what I just said? Your opinion's not normative. It's one of many, right? So let's get some more data points. You're not offended by that? What kind of person are you? And I didn't say I wasn't offended by it. I said, your opinion alone is not carrying the day for normalcy. Now I'm whatever, sexist, racist, homophobic. I'm something. There's got to be a label for me because I don't agree with one voice being normative. Something's wrong with this picture. That's what we're struggling with here. These good ideas turning into bad ideas. Here's bad ideas in action. These are just examples, and they're all from the Lukianoff book. Intimidation and violence. UC Berkeley, 1,500 protesters surrounding a building where Milo was going to speak. He was banned on Twitter the summer before. Protesters' goal was to prevent the speech. Now, what is it saying to us? I not only want to protest and say, this guy's not a good guy, but I want to make sure nobody else gets to hear him speak because he's a bad guy. Do you see how difficult that is? And yet, college campuses, this is just a simple example of what happens. You just have to look around on any given week in the news, and you'll find where people have decided that my opinion is normative, and nobody should hear that person. We should ban so-and-so on this social platform because they said something bad, right? Okay, how many times have they said something bad? How bad is it? Is it illegal, right? Or is it just something I disagree with and now I want my voice to be normative? That's the social shift. Witch hunts. Travell, this is the article. In defense of transracialism, caused an uproar in a philosophy journal. He juxtaposes Caitlyn Jenner with the NAACP official who identifies as black. So how do you think he was identified? How do you think people put a label on him? Of course he's anti-trans, right? And he's probably a racist too. But when you read the paper, it's talking about this social change philosophically that we're in, and he uses those two things as examples. But because the analysis is less than 1 inch deep, you don't get an analysis that says, oh, okay, I agree with him, I disagree with him, some of his points, not all his points, etc. Because of this social shift and where we just assume that a label goes. Right? Cancel culture, we see it all around us, right? Let me tell you a story of a gamer. This is one of my gaming friends on Twitch. He's playing a game that used to be called, it's gone now, but it was a good game, called H1Z1. Anybody familiar with H1Z1?
It's one guy.
Shall we go back? Let's go back. Okay. He was a pro at H1Z1. He gets contracted by this big org. I mean, he was going to make really decent money playing H1Z1 on Twitch and in tournaments, etc. And he signs the contract, everything cool. In one of the games he plays somehow online, nobody really figures out, he shoots another character in the game who then gets upset that he's hacking or something. So goes back and looks at his history on Facebook, Twitter, Snap, Insta, and finds a comment 7 or 8 years before. This guy's probably in his early 20s, so when this guy was a teenager. Finds a comment that's objectionable, and then sends that to the org saying, this is the guy you're paying to play, he's a racist, he's a this, he's a that. The org calls him up in the middle of the night and says, you have, I think it was 8 hours to defend yourself, right? So I just happened to see a post he made, and I got online and you know, he and I sat with another couple of people, went through his whole social media to make sure there was nothing else there. He eliminated a bunch of his old posts. The org calls him back an hour into this and says, you're done, we're letting you go. Because of a tweet from 8 years previous to where he was at that time. There's something in this. I mean, even if he wasn't a friend of mine, there's something in this that I look at and I go, how deep is your analysis of what's happening, right? Did you look at a lot of tweets? Did you look at tweets over time? Did you look at recent tweets and see if there's anything objectionable? No. Simply that tweet from 8 years before when he was a teenager lost him his livelihood. What is it about this kind of cancel culture that we deal with as therapists? How do we say to kids, yeah, everybody screws up, yeah, right? And you learn something and you move on and you become a different person. You start to think in a different way. They live in a culture where if I screw up at all once, I'm labeled for life. That's the culture they're growing up in. Our adult words fall kind of short to their experience. Maybe when we understand this and we can say, okay, well, let's just analyze this. Is there any ways in which you've really changed from where you were as a 3-year-old, as a 7-year-old, you know? Yeah, well, that's what life is about. When you get to adulthood, you see it. When you're 15, you don't, or 16. Finally, the Karen phenomena, which personally, I'll tell you, this is my confession for the day. I personally enjoy watching Karen videos on YouTube. Oh, wrong hand. They are funny. They're funny. Does anybody, Has anybody else ever seen them even once? I won't ask you to
I have.
acknowledge your addiction, okay? Karen videos. They're fun to watch because we look at them and we go, how dumb can you be? Right? We look at them and we say, what kind of person are you acting like this in public? But you know what? Karens point out the underlying difficulty we have, which is our sense of what's normal and our opinions. I don't know why that got there. Our opinions being normative. Wait a minute, you're of another race and you're in my neighborhood? I don't think so. You say you own that house? I don't think you own that house. I'm going to stand in your way and I'm going to not let you in while the cops come. Right? There's something weird about how we see normative opinion. Right? And I think that's why I sin in watching Karen videos, right? Because I watch them and I go, oh my God, I'm glad you don't live in my neighborhood. And there's that, that kind of pleasure that we all get as therapists where we look and go, I wonder what those symptoms say about you, right? What's that symptomology, right? So these are things that we could easily identify as bad ideas in action. It's fine to protest, what's his name? Milo. It's fine to protest Milo, but to think that I need to protest Milo in a way that makes sure nobody hears him is probably the overstep. Am I better off letting people hear him and then say, okay, what kind of evidence do you have for your assertions, right? I live with a bunch of priests, all of whom are extremely liberal human beings except for one. And he and everybody avoids watching the news with him because he likes to watch Fox News. So I sat with him and watched Fox News, and they had a report where they said, well, this is, such and such and such. And I said, gosh, Joe, that's interesting. And he perked up like, Ryan's watching the news with me, right? I mean, this is good. We have a relationship. And I said, but Joe, I wonder where they got the information to support that, because they didn't cite anything. There's no article there. There's no survey there. It's not Reuters. It's not, where did they get that, I wonder? And he looked at me and I said, when you look at other newses, they have the citation of where they got the information. I wonder where they got that. He would never watch the news with me again. I don't know why. I have no clue why. Ben, do you know why? I mean, I was just being the scientist on a theological school campus.
You just can't hang.
This is just something I found on the internet that I thought was funny.
Like a psychopath.
But it says something about our generational differences, doesn't it? I go regularly and drink coffee, but I bring my cell phone and I look like I'm reading something on the cell. I don't want to be creepy and psychopathic. Because my specialty is psychopathics, right? They're sociopaths. Here's the research base for Twinkie. When you look at some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, what she uses to get to iGen or GenMe are these, and they're actually, I think most of them are publicly accessible, so you could actually go look for them. High schoolers since 1976, 7th and 8th graders since 1991. This is a survey monitoring the future where they ask a bunch of questions about how they see the world. The Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance, that's administered by the CDC since 1991. It's largely about things that impact negatively. American Freshman Survey, this is a higher ed research institute, and it's for new college students, and it's been going on since 1966. And then General Social Survey, which is adults, since 1972. So what she's done is take all that data, and she's parsed it out in various ways. People who like numbers, if there are any people who like numbers in the room, Ben, no. She takes all that stuff and she says, okay, what if we take 15-year-olds from 1970 something and compare them to 80s, 90s, you know. So she parses all that out, and then she parses out, what about just this population? What about just people in this, right, bracket? So a lot of what we're going to talk about is from her research in these. You can find all of that in the iGen book, and it's also in the Generation Me book. So if you look at those, you'll see right off she says, this is what I use, and they're almost all publicly accessible in some way. I haven't gone and looked personally as to where they're accessible, but it would be interesting. I'm not a numbers guy as much as she is. I mean, she loves it. Okay? So let me talk briefly, 9:20, okay. Let me talk briefly about social values. Social values, millennials are have less of this than the boomers. Social values declined through Gen X and millennial years fairly linearly. Early Genners had more social values than Gen Xers, more social values than Gen Xers. Late Gen X and early millennials look similar. Social values meaning, do I want to volunteer? Do I want to give? Do I want to save the whales? Do I want to, right? Those kinds of social reaching values. For the boomers, probably as we've gotten older, we've done that middle-aged shift to where, like when I was in private practice, I was interested in getting paid from the God, I always do that. Managed care? Sorry. Mangled just comes to mind, I don't know why. And so I was, you want to hear an interesting story? Yeah. I was working in private practice with my former supervisor after I got licensed. And he had contracts with these various companies, and I was able to get on the contracts. And so we have this referral. And so I see the person 2 times, and I bill because I know it's going to take time to get paid the first time. So I bill after 2 sessions so that it's in the mix. We all know how it works. And then I keep seeing the client. Don't get paid, call them, and get a woman on the phone who says, well, that number is not in our computer system. And I say, well, you sent the referral. I have the page right here. And she says, well, can you fax that to me? And I said, sure. So I hand the piece of paper to my secretary and say, can you fax this? And she says, well, I'll call you back when we get it. I said, it's coming right now. And I'll wait on the line while you go pick it out of the machine. And she says, the machine's on another floor, sir. I said, you have an elevator? So she goes and gets it. She comes back up. She's looking at the thing, and she says, yes, sir, I see what you mean. I'll have my supervisor call you. And I say, okay, when will the supervisor call me? She says, just a moment. Supervisor gets on the phone and says, I'll call you tomorrow. And I said, okay, what time are you going to call? She's kind of a little bit miffed by now because I'm simply asking questions. So she says, I'll call you before noon. So I said, okay, let's just understand that if you don't call me by noon, I'll be calling you at 12:05 because we have a pact now, you're calling. Yes, okay, fine. She doesn't call. I call, ask for her. They say she's not here. I said, yes, I know she's there because she was supposed to call me up to 5 minutes ago. She didn't call. I told her I would call at 12:05, and I am here at 12:05. Well, let me see if we can find her. So they find her, she gets on the phone, and she says, yeah, it looks like we sent that, but it didn't get entered in the computer, and so we'll have to issue a brand new referral. And I said, okay, so are you going to backdate the referral? She said, well, I can't backdate the referral. And I said, okay, so I'll send a bill for the first 4 sessions now to the client at my usual rate. She said, well, you can't do that because we have a contract. And I said, yeah, but you broke the contract by not paying me for what you sent me. And so she's outside of the contract. But I'll be glad to honor the contract when the new referral shows up. So the woman says, all right, fine. I'll send you a new referral. So I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. She backdated and sent me a new referral. The thing is with the insurance companies, I had to be like calling, I'll wait while you, it's an odd thing, but it's the reality. So these social values, I want to help people. I mean, I'm a Catholic priest who has a license as a psychotherapist. I want to help people. I don't care how much I get paid. I just want to, if you agree to pay me $50, I expect $50. I don't expect you to, you know. I had an insurance company that didn't pay in 60 days. It said in their contract they did. I called them up and I said, today's day 61, we're mailing the bill to the client because you didn't pay. We have a contract. Page such and such, number such and such, you pay in 60 days, today's day 61. I've sent you the bills you haven't paid. What do you want from me? You broke the contract, I didn't. That company didn't do that in the future because when Dr. Silva called, they were like, oh shoot, okay, fine. Give it to her. What are we saying about boomers, millennials? Where is that social piece when we're raised with a kind of I deserve certificate, trophy? What's the interplay of those two things, right? Then we have leisure values. Millennials are much more leisure-oriented than boomers. Leisure values increased through Gen X and declined slightly through millennial years. What that means is the idea that my work is for me to get money to pay bills. For boomers, probably silence, greats. My job is who I am, to a greater degree. By the time we get down to the millennials, I know plenty of millennials who said, look, this company just isn't understanding that I need to work from home, or that, you know, I need to come in later, or whatever it would be. Thank you very much, we'll see you later, I can get another job. Because they live in a world where that's becoming more norm. So what do we do with those alphas you're dealing with, or the I's that you're dealing with? How do we help them to see there is a value to perseverance, there's a value to being resilient over time, because they may be hearing a different message socially. And then finally, workplace desirability. This was the most interesting thing to me when I looked at it, because the shifts are interesting shifts. Millennials are less entrepreneurial despite their reputation than Gen X's. Gen X's want to own their own businesses. So they're out there on YouTube, they're out there on Insta and Snap, putting up their stuff, showing their products. Thank you for ordering. Look at all the orders I got today. There's one guy that I've seen. Fascinating character. His name is Smiley, right? That's his thing, or Smiles. Anyway, it's one of the two. But every once in a while, he'll show his printer and the long, you know, paper across the room of all the mailing labels that are printed out for his orders. You know, and he does these little videos, and, oh, thank you so much for the orders. Look at all this, I gotta work all day, you know. They're more entrepreneurial in wanting to run their own lives, their own businesses, their own income, in a way that allows them to the flexibility. So when you get to leisure and also work, you start to see some differences. Millennials are less work in social service organizations. Millennials are less interested than boomers and Gen Xers. Large social service agencies, they're too bound by rules, right? I mean, who wants to work for a social agency? Like, who wants to work for a 501 where, you know, you're doing all this work, and in the end, people are complaining about whatever it be. Why didn't I get the pen with the corporate name on it, you know? There's less interest. It doesn't mean they don't do it. It doesn't mean they're not gonna find it, but the interest is not there. Large org, I don't think so, you know? Small startup, more exciting, more risky. Millennials are more interested than boomers and Gen Xers in school, university, and government agencies, right? they're more interested in those things. Education, federal agencies. One of my godsons, this crazy guy that he is, he finished high school and decided he wanted to go to college in Southern California. And so he went to Irvine, he got a bachelor's. While he was there, he met one of the professors, said to him, you know, you're really pretty good at this thing. He's a, I never can remember now, it's like microbiologist. So you're really pretty good at this thing. Why don't you apply to this national, which one was it? Like NIH. Why don't you apply to NIH? They have a program to help college students get educated in whatever, work in a lab. He applies, gets a job, works for a while. Then while he's doing that, they say, you know, there's this program in California that'll help you get your PhD in microbiology. Why don't you apply to that? So he applies, he gets into UCLA, does his doctorate at UCLA. First year, California, in its wisdom, decides we don't want to finance that program anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So he flies up to Sacramento, sits in front of the legislators saying, do all of you want to catch a disease that we don't have any clue about? Do all of you want somebody able to figure out what it is? You better finance this program, right? So he goes up there and testifies. While he's gone, the faculty at UCLA get together and say, we ought to make sure that this kid can get through the program. So UCLA steps up and says, don't worry about it. We're going to make sure the money's there. We're going to honor it even if the state doesn't. Just keep going. Finishes that, goes to work for the CDC, and that's where he is now. Loves it. Like a pig in mud. You know, this kid is like, I love going in every morning. It's a federal agency. I've gotten to fly to all kinds of places in the world, and I can't tell anybody where I've been until after I've been there. And he's like, just got back from New Zealand, and I talked to his mother. She said, oh, Brian, he's in the airport in Los Angeles coming back from New Zealand. I said, what was he doing in New Zealand? He can't tell us. Okay. That's what interests these 20, 30-somethings, right? So millennials and boomers are willing to work in large corps. Less or more millennials are willing to work in large corps. Now it's kind of weird when you say social work agencies own their own businesses, but they're willing to work in large corps. I think it might be because there's a flexibility in large corporations to kind of make your mark, right? Not everybody's Google, which is, you know, really open, or Facebook, which is really open as far as work settings go. But I think that might be part of it. But Twenge, I mean, it's in the Campbell, this stuff's in the Campbell article. I think it has something to do with the flexibility that, you know, you can kind of broaden your horizons. In a small corp, everybody knows where you are. You're in the corner behind that wall. In a large corp, you can kind of get lost and make your own way. And then finally, Gen Xers are less willing to work in large corps than millennials. Yes?
A saying that comes to mind,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm being biased because apparently I'm iGen,
Mm-hmm.
is you live to work or you work to live.
Yes. Yes.
That's a saying that comes to mind going through
Yeah.
all of this.
That encapsulates the social shift, right? For the boomers, we live to work, right? We were like, you need a job, get a job, right? I mean, there's at least one famous rock song about that. I think it's probably George Thorogood, get a job, right? That was his thing, you know, long hair, get a job. I think it encapsulates it. For younger generations, it's not who they are. They see themselves in other ways. I'm a gamer who plays video games online, and people subscribe and I make money to support myself, and I'm going to be famous like Ninja and have green hair, right? There are plenty of gamers out there who are able to make enough money to live because of the way some of the systems work. Twitter and and Twitch and YouTube all monetize the streamers. So they put ads into your stream so that you make a little bit of money, but you make a few cents is really what you make. Subscriptions, they get sometimes 50, sometimes a little more of the $5 that you pay for a subscription per month to their page on Twitch. They might have invitations to do things. They might have sponsors like G Fuel. They might have ways in which they're going to make money and it's their little business. But they're 16, 18, 20, 21 years old. So the business is actually very encapsulated. It's not who they are. They have a private life and they have a public life on camera. So I think there's something to that. Is it living to work or working to live? I think it's the working to live that's probably the more modern, contemporary thought. I have a job so I can make money to pay my bills and go places I want to go and do things I want to do. You know, I mean, there are whole channels out there like David Dobrik who make big time bucks. They travel around doing stupid stuff and putting it onto video and stick it on the internet, and everybody goes, woo! Sponsors come along like crazy. So they live in big places and drive fancy cars, which they then video, and then people become enamored to, oh, I want to do that. I want to drive a Lamborghini, right? So now I'm going to become a gamer, I'm going to become a YouTuber, I'm going to become an influencer, I'm going to, right? Very different than the boomers. I look at some of that stuff and I go, how can you possibly make a living? I mean, I just don't see it. Okay, does that all kind of make sense? Okay. This is more twangy. Work centrality, if you think of work as being the center of existence, the silence greater than the boomers, greater than the Gen Xers, or the Gen Me's. So work is more central to the silence than the boomers. The work ethic, you know, I should go to work and I should give to my company and you know, rise up the ladder, whatever it is. The silent, greater than the boomers, greater than the Gen Xers and the Gen Me's. So it's very similar. It's not just how central is work to my life, it's what's my ethic about work. Family-centric, the Gen Me's, greater than the Gen Xers, greater than the boomers. Now that shouldn't surprise us if we think about what came first, right? I would love to be at the baseball game, but I have to work. Versus a younger person who would say, my son has a baseball game, I'm going to come in early and I'm going to leave early so I can be at the baseball game, and the boss has to kind of adjust. Different centrality, different work ethic. And leisure values. Gen Me greater than Gen X, greater than Boomer. So the leisure factor, I should be able to go places and do things, and I'll work on my laptop. I'll zoom in on my laptop and, right? There's a different ethic. Does that make sense to everybody, or am I losing you somehow in all this? No, it's a cool deal. These are just more from Twenge. Altruistic values of like helping and volunteering, there are no differences really. I mean, there are some minor differences between their volunteerism among millennials and boomers, but they're not huge statistical differences. And this is in an article that, I'm going to send these, actually Ben has the USB, and so he has all of these articles, not just the bibliography, but the PDFs of all the articles that I'm referring to. Intrinsic, like meaning and use of talents, no major differences, same stuff, different day. Extrinsic values like money and status. Gen X greater than Gen Me, greater than boomers. This is interesting to me because really it has to do with money and status. These are the YouTubers driving the fancy cars, going to the fancy places, recording it on video. You're nodding your head because you know what I'm talking about. Going to all the fancy places, videoing it like this is the life I have, putting it out there. People then respond, sponsors respond, they send them stuff, they do unboxings. Anybody seen unboxings? Yeah. I mean, like, oh, so-and-so send me, this thing, let's unbox it and see what's in there. That creates an expectation. Affiliation and social values. Now, there are two different studies. One is a Tang-like study that Twenge refers to, and the other one is a cross-sectional study. And they show different things. That affiliation and social values could be boomers greater than Gen X and Gen Ys, or it could be Gen Me and Gen X greater than boomers. It just has to do with the way they researched it. Okay? And you'll have access to that article. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of details, But there's something interesting about the shifts. Job satisfaction, intention to leave. Gen Me's greater than Gen X's in job satisfaction. But conflicting results for the intention to leave. We don't have a clear picture whether the Gen Me's or the Gen Xers or the iGens are more likely to leave a job because they're some way dissatisfied, they're looking for the next good thing. Very often what you hear from what I've read in the research is this job either doesn't give me enough flexibility or this job doesn't really make a significant contribution to society and they want to make a difference, so they leave to go to something that's going to make a difference. Now, how you define that difference, as you see, it could be a social value, it could be a voluntarism, it could be a lot of things. But it really depends. One of the nice things about millennials and Gen X's and iGens is the desire to be socially responsible, right? We need to treat everybody well, we need to not say things or do things that will harm other people. The downside of that is this idea of I'm offended, and my offense being a normative thing. That's the undercarriage. And then individual traits and attitudes. Gen Me's, I don't know what happened here, this got screwed up. Gen Me's greater than Gen X's, greater than boomers. So individual traits and attitudes, individual personality traits, attitudes toward the world that are positive. So how does this information strike you? We should be about 10 o'clock. Am I not good? What I did is put this in so that you'd have a chance to kind of look at this and say, does it match my experience in psychotherapy? Does it match your interpersonal experience? So separate from your work with people, does it match your experience with yourself, your family, brothers and sisters, cohort at graduate school, high school, whatever it would be? Not only does it match your work, but does it match your personal experience in looking at some of these areas? And then what generation do you belong to? Think for a moment about where you would fit. And does any of this information ring true of your generation and your experience? Not personal experience, but does it really look like that's somewhat true, similar, whatever, in the generation in which you work? And do you see these traits in your peers? Okay? So these are the questions. I'll leave them up here. Maybe you just want to turn around and talk to the 3 people near you or something, but form a little group. Here's the questions. Take some time to just see how relevant this is to your work, your personal experience, and your observation of your gen. Or, you might want to talk about another gen. Just don't talk about Dr. C and myself, okay? Anybody else you can talk about. Ben, you can talk about.
It's fine.
All right. So, there you go. Let's give you, 20 minutes to do that, and then we'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about what came up in the group. How's that?
Yes, sir.